Hello, I am Judith OdenChoi, and I'm presenting identity-based roles and rhizomatic social justice movements on Twitter with Jim Herbslot, Jessica Hammer, and Jody Ferlisi at Carnegie Mellon. We're using Tarot's definition of social movements here as working outside of existing political structures to try to cause change. And I just want to remind us that movements often take years, if not decades, and generations to really enact and see change happen. And this happens through the concerted work of individuals who are dedicating their careers, their livelihoods, their lives, and their health to this work. And that's important to keep in mind in this current moment of hashtag campaigns, is that in my mind, a hashtag campaign might be a very important part of today's networked movements, but it does not a movement make. The movement goes beyond what happens in the hashtag in order to really see that change happen in our world and in our culture or society. So the movements are today, they are decentralized, they're horizontal, and they're often interconnected. And I think that's something else that we lose track of when we really focus on the hashtag, is that it's easy to lose sight of the way that these different movements are interconnected and the movements and activists are interconnected when we look at the single hashtag at a time. So in this work, our focus is on the individual activist and thinking about the role that the activist takes on that they might bring into any kind of movement work that they do and the way that they use Twitter to do that movement work. So we're looking at how do their professional and personal identities shape the way that they use Twitter and the roles that they take on? And how does that affect the way that they construct their movement identity? And this is pulling from ideas of identity from Snow and McAdams and others. And leading us to future questions about how these roles, these different roles that we're going to discuss, might work together within a single movement and where those tensions and challenges might be. So this is a mixed method study. It includes interviews with 12 activists and collecting their tweets from 11 of those 12 activists over the summer of 2016. It's old data, but it parallels the times that we're in many ways, including several murders at the hands of police, Black Lives Matter protest, the Pulse nightclub shooting, and the US presidential primaries. I am not going to get very much into the quantitative analysis of the tweet corpus or really the content analysis of the tweets, but that you can find that in the paper. So this population are people who are self-identified social justice activists across a variety of different movements and different communities, many of them with intersectional identities and using intersectional lenses to the causes. They're across different cities in the US, and one in Canada and one in the UK. Many of the participants their career, their work is in social justice related fields. I use that term kind of broadly. The findings were really just going to focus on the 3 roles that were developed. Those roles were developed through analysis of the interviews, and then we validated it through the quantitative analysis of the Twitter data set. So I'll touch a little bit on identity first. So we're talking about identity amplification as amplifying an aspect of one's identity in relation to a movement. So for example, if I'm working in a feminist movement, I might amplify my identity as a woman. Our interviewees found this was very important. Talking about their personal identity was very important on Twitter because it lended authenticity to their activist tweeting. So the first role we can jump right into is the organizer, or the social arsonist, a term pulled from Fred Ross's Axioms for Organizers and repeated by one of our interviewees. So what organizers do is their job is really to inspire others to act, right? They're trying to light a fire under others. And they're also building community, and they're doing the behind the scenes work of coordinating hashtag campaigns. Organizers have very strong movement identities. When we asked them, how do you describe yourself? They would describe themselves by the movement they were part of and their role within it first thing. And their relationships are connected to the movement, their professional connections are connected to the movement, and in fact, they bring that movement identity into other parts of their lives and other communities that they're part of. The storyteller, on the other hand, whereas the organizer uses Twitter in a very relational way, a lot of reciprocal tweeting and a lot of mentioning, The storytellers use Twitter very much as a publishing platform, one-way communication. They use hashtags the least, all text tweets the most. And their job is really to make meaning of the events that are happening and to work to change the narratives, to shift narratives that in support of the movement. Storytellers really hold on to their independence, right? And their identity is very personalized and very focused through their own experience, and their identity as a writer, or artist, or academic is very important to them. The third type is an advocate. One of the interviewees described herself as being a radical witness, right? That her job is to amplify the voice of others, right? And to build bridges between affected communities and others, whether that other is authorities that they're fighting against, or whether that other is a group that might have the resources to help the affected community. Advocates have a really interesting relationship to the movement, right? They might negotiate their identity between those two communities that they're building relationships with. And they tend to have very innovative ways of shaping their role and solidifying their identity. For example, P11 gave herself the title of social media senator, and did that through a process of doing a sort of poll on Twitter to make sure she got buy-in from the local residents to legitimize that title that she gave herself. So these three types and these kinds of behaviors are supported by their feature use and by their reciprocal relationships through friends and retweeting, and following. And you can see that detailed in the paper. So what this brings us around to is the understanding that these activists who are participating online in discussing social justice issues, of raising awareness around issues, of participating in hashtag campaigns, of creating the campaigns, these sorts of people who are dedicated to this work are not a crowd who is working indiscriminately or without being able to see the big picture, but in fact, they're experts, and they're doing the job of bringing their unique expertise and experiences to the work that they do on Twitter. Or yeah, the way that they use Twitter in order to do their work might be more correct. The professional identity influences how activists take on roles within network movements, while their personal identity, for example, being a woman in feminism, might influence what movement they're a part of. Their professional identity influences how they enact their activism. And their personal identity expression is not just an act of legitimizing them or authenticity, right? It's also a way of expanding the movement and helping connect different communities and causes based on their own intersectional identities, right? So when P3 talks about being disabled and about sex and sexuality, he is expanding the disability movement, creating another sort of rhizome, another part of that root, to connect it to conversations about sex and sexuality. And so then we also have to talk about, we see that these people have different kinds of relationships, enact activism differently, and have different kinds of relationships to the movement that can lead to some tensions. So storytellers, for example, are likely to be experienced communicators and are likely to be the ones who are really amplified and elevated on the platform, right? They're going to say something witty. They're going to write a great article. They're going to be the ones who might go viral, right? Well, organizers who are focused more on that relationship building, that relational, they're not crafting viral tweets, right? And they're not as rewarded on Twitter, right? They're not going to be elevated in the same way. And that can cause tensions because the storyteller may have never had a role on the ground in any movement, while the organizer may have, right? And then the advocates have this really tricky work of proving their authenticity, of proving their identity to multiple communities. And this was a burden that the advocates discussed. So you can see how Twitter might cause tension between people who are working in these different ways for the movement, but also how there's a potential that this role differentiation might be to a movement's advantage. And I think there's great research and design work to be done around that. So I just want to end with thanking you and thanking all the people who have supported me and made this happen. And I can't leave without recognizing the moment that we're in. Thank you.